The room exploded with laughter. Over 200 people, all of them looking at him. A man in coveralls stood at the back, holding a mop. Next to a cart filled with cleaning supplies he couldn't count correctly. Or so they said. The woman on stage pointed straight at him. Her voice sliced through the auditorium. He can't even count the cleaning bottles in his cart. Pause. Let them laugh. And you people think he understands advanced theorem structures? The laughter came in waves now, pressed against the walls, filled every corner, but the man didn't move, didn't apologize, didn't back down. Instead, he did something no one expected. He pulled off his gloves, one at a time, folded them carefully, put them in his pocket, and started walking toward the stage, toward the massive chalkboard covered in failed attempts, toward the problem that had defeated everyone in the room for 3 hours. His work boots made no sound on the carpet. The laughter began to die, because something in the way he moved said this wasn't over, said it was just beginning. Saturday morning, 6 a.m., the same apartment Daniel Torres had lived in for 7 years, Dorchester, 3 blocks from the Red Line. 3rd floor walk-up in a building where the radiators worked about 60% of the time, and the windows never quite sealed against the cold. Daniel woke to the sound of Ryan coughing. Not bad. Not the kind that meant a trip to the emergency room, just the kind that meant Daniel needed to get up and give his son the inhaler. The one that cost $280 a month. The one that Daniel's insurance from the university didn't quite cover because janitorial staff only got the basic plan. He rolled off the couch. He'd been sleeping on the couch for 3 years. Since Ryan turned 4 and needed his own room, needed his own space, needed to not wake up every morning and see his father getting dressed in the dark. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, kitchen you could barely turn around in. Bathroom where the shower knob had been broken for 6 months and you had to use pliers to turn the water on. Daniel walked to Ryan's room. The door was half open, always half open, never fully closed, because Ryan didn't like the dark, didn't like feeling trapped. Something about the way his mother had left. Just vanished one day when Ryan was 3. Walked out while Daniel was at work and never came back. Ryan was sitting up in bed now, eyes open. Hair sticking up in every direction. Dad, I need it. Daniel grabbed the inhaler from the nightstand, blue and white, albuterol. 2 puffs twice a day, more if needed. Ryan took it, shook it once, pressed it to his mouth, breathed in, held it, counted to 10 in his head. Breathed out better? Ryan nodded. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, put his hand on his son's forehead. No fever. Good, you hungry? Kind of. Eggs? Okay. Daniel stood up, walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator. 4 eggs left, half a loaf of bread. Milk that expired 2 days ago but probably still fine. Cheese that definitely wasn't fine. Some leftovers from the Chinese place down the street. Wednesday's dinner. Today was Saturday. Too long. He cracked 3 eggs into a pan. Saved one for tomorrow. Made toast with the bread. Poured orange juice from a container he'd bought on sale last week. Carried it all to the small table in the corner where Ryan was already sitting with his coloring book. The robot page. Always the robot page. Ryan had been working on that same robot for 2 weeks. Couldn't finish it. Kept changing his mind about the colors. Blue chest or red chest. Red arms or blue arms. Green eyes or yellow eyes. Still stuck? Ryan nodded. Mouth full of eggs. Want me to help? Ryan shook his head. Daniel understood. Ryan needed to figure it out himself. Needed to make his own decisions. 7 years old and already stubborn as hell. Already independent in ways that made Daniel proud and terrified in equal measure. They ate in silence for a while. Then Ryan asked the question Daniel had been dreading. Dad, next week my class is going on a field trip. Daniel kept eating, kept his face neutral. Where to? The aquarium. That sounds fun. It costs $25. There it was. $25. Daniel had exactly $340 in his wallet right now. From last week's paycheck. The paycheck he got every Friday from the university for cleaning their buildings at night. The paycheck that was supposed to cover rent and groceries and utilities and Ryan's medication and everything else until next Friday. Rent was due Monday. $1,450. Electric bill was late. $127. Ryan's medication needed to be refilled this week. $280. Total. $1,857 in his wallet. $340. Paycheck Friday. $680. Total after Friday. $1,020. Still short. $837, and Ryan wanted to go to the aquarium. I'll figure it out, buddy. Ryan looked up, eyes searching his father's face for the truth. You promise? I promise. It was a lie. Daniel didn't know how he was going to come up with $837 plus $25 in the next week. Didn't know where that money was going to come from. There were no extra shifts available at the university. No one wanted their buildings cleaned more than they already were. And his day job at the sewing machine repair shop paid cash under the table, but Mr. Lopez was barely scraping by himself. Couldn't afford to give Daniel more hours, even if Daniel asked. Which he wouldn't, because Daniel didn't ask for things. Hadn't asked for things since his father died. He pulled off his left glove, slowly folded it, put it in his pocket, pulled off his right glove, folded it, put it in his pocket. The laughter started to die down. People noticing, people confused, because Daniel wasn't backing down, wasn't apologizing, was doing something else entirely. He stepped past the two students in front of him. They leaned back, made room. Daniel walked down the center aisle, his boots silent on carpet, past Professor Clark, who'd failed, past Dr. Moore, who'd failed, past Stephen Hill, who'd started this, past Dr. Davis herself. She was still smiling, still waiting for him to fail, still certain this would end the way she expected. Daniel walked to the board, stood in front of it, picked up a piece of chalk, small, white. Almost gone, the room behind him was completely silent now. No laughter, no whispers. Just silence. Daniel raised the chalk, held it near the board, thought one last time about putting it down, about walking away, about being smart, about being safe. But then he looked back, one last time, at Ryan. His son was watching, hands gripping the coloring book, Fox pale, waiting to see what his father would do. And Daniel made his choice. He put chalk to board and started to write. Part 2. Daniel wrote in the upper right corner of the board, away from the failed attempts, away from Dr. Davis's elegant but wrong proof. His handwriting was small, precise, the kind that came from years of working in margins, of fitting thoughts into borrowed notebooks, of making space where there wasn't any. He used notation from the 1970s, the older style, shorter, more compact, the kind he'd learned from discarded textbooks he'd found in recycling bins behind the mathematics building. The kind that made sense to him even if nobody used it anymore. A graduate student in the third row leaned over to her neighbor, whispered something. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he heard the tone, confusion. Dismissal. 2 rows behind her, someone laughed, not loud. Just a short exhale through the nose, the kind of laugh that says, "This is going to be entertaining." Daniel kept writing, drew a small arrow connecting one part of Dr. Moore's abandoned work to a section of Dr. Davis's proof. Then another arrow back to the original conjecture statement at the top of the board. The arrows formed a closed loop. Inside the loop, Daniel wrote a question mark, large enough to see from the back row. Professor Kenneth Clark stood up, didn't wait to be called on, didn't raise his hand. Just stood. "Excuse me." His voice carried across the silent auditorium. "Could you explain what that symbol means?" Pause, because at this institution we generally use modern conventions. A ripple of laughter, small, controlled, but enough to let Daniel know they were still watching him fail, still waiting for the punchline. Daniel didn't turn around, kept facing the board, spoke without looking at anyone. "It means the same thing either way. The older form is shorter. I can switch if it helps." His voice was steady, quieter than he expected, but steady. He kept writing. The line he was building reached the bottom of the board's right side. He started a second column underneath the first. Stephen Hill had moved. Daniel noticed it peripherally. The graduate student who'd laughed first had come down from the back rows, was sitting in row 3 now, leaning forward, elbows on knees. The smile he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by something else, attention, focus, maybe the first hint of doubt creeping into his certainty that this was a joke. Daniel drew another arrow, this one connecting Professor Clark's topological approach to a step Dr. Davis had written near the top. Then a third arrow looping back to the original statement. 3 arrows, 3 attempts, all circling back to the same place, all making the same mistake. Daniel turned around, first time since he'd started writing, looked at the room, 200 faces looking back, some curious, some hostile, some just confused. "This is the assumption," he pointed at the closed loop of arrows. "Everyone in this room accepted it before the work started. You assume the boundary space behaves the same way at its edge as it does in the interior. Pause, let them process. It doesn't. Another pause. Once that's wrong, everything above this line is solving a problem that doesn't exist." The murmuring that had been constant background noise died completely. Dr. Davis moved closer to the board. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak. Just walked up the side aisle and positioned herself where she could read what he'd written, write it once. Then again the muscle along her jaw tightened, just a fraction, just enough. The auditorium had shifted around Daniel without him asking for it. The graduate students in the lower rows had set down their phones. The visiting scholars had stopped exchanging knowing glances. Even Professor Clark slowly sat back down, his arms uncrossed, hands resting on his knees. The room had stopped watching a janitor at a chalkboard, started watching something else, something they hadn't prepared for. Daniel turned back to the board, from the closed loop, and the question mark. He opened a new line of reasoning, didn't argue against the failed attempts above him, just ignored them. Built downward from a clean foundation, the structure was different, didn't follow the path any of the experts had tried. It folded the problem along an axis no one in the room had thought to look for. A woman's voice from near the center of the auditorium, quiet but clear. What he's doing is reframing the entire boundary condition. Dr. Barbara Allen, 61 years old, Stanford professor, one of the top topologists in the country. She was leaning forward in her seat, glasses pushed up into her hair, watching the board with the absorbed stillness of someone who'd forgotten other people existed. Dr. Davis heard her, heard everything, turned her head a fraction of an inch toward Dr. Allen, then back to the board. For the first time that evening, Patricia Davis's face wasn't arranged in any particular expression. No smile, no condescension, no performance. She was reading, the way she read papers submitted to journals where she sat on review boards, with slow, precise attention, looking for the seam that would let her tear it apart, except she couldn't find one. The man in coveralls in front of the chalkboard wasn't guessing, wasn't improvising, was working from a structure he'd clearly carried inside his head for a long time. And the structure was sound, worse than sound. It was elegant, the kind of elegance she'd spent 30 years teaching students to recognize, to produce, to defend against lesser minds who tried to fake it. She'd never produced it herself, and she knew it. The recognition arrived in her chest like a small cold weight that hadn't been there a minute ago. Daniel reached the halfway point. His work filled the right side of the board, clean lines threading through and around the failed attempts above him. The structure was still standing, still coherent, still pointing toward something. Dr. Davis moved again, stepped up onto the platform beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something expensive, something that cost more than his weekly grocery budget. She addressed the board rather than him. Used the measured voice she used in graduate seminars. Let's slow down, pause. I'd like to see this proven rigorously, step by step, to the standard we hold ourselves to in this department. Daniel lowered his chalk, waited. Your transition from the third line to the fourth. Dr. Davis pointed. You're claiming a continuity result. Show me. Cite the theorem. Walk us through the conditions. Her tone was perfectly polite, the politeness of a closing door. Daniel looked at the line she meant. He knew it was true, had known it was true for years, had arrived at it the way he arrived at most things in his work, by turning the object over in his head on the train, by drawing it on napkins during lunch breaks at the sewing machine shop, by following the shape of it until the shape became obvious. But he'd never been asked to cite a theorem by name, had never been required to lay it down in the formal sequence a referee would want to see. He'd read those theorems, could feel which one he was using, but couldn't in that moment remember the name on the paper that first published it. It follows from a standard continuity argument. Dr. Davis wasn't asking anymore, was waiting. Which one? Daniel named a theorem, Anderson. It was close, but not exactly right. And Dr. Timothy Moore in the second row caught it, let out a small sound, half cough, half laugh. Professor Clark stood up again, the pressure shifted. Came at Daniel from three directions at once. Clark questioned the next line. Moore questioned the line after that. Dr. Nicole Harris, young assistant professor on the far aisle, eager to be seen contributing, demanded that Daniel formally define a term he'd used without comment 4 minutes earlier. The questions weren't unfair. They were exactly the questions the room would ask any speaker, standard academic interrogation. But they were also exactly the questions a man who'd taught himself out of discarded textbooks had never been required to answer in front of 200 people. Daniel answered the first one, correctly but slowly, and sweared the second one, also correct, but in language that was a decade out of date. And Professor Clark corrected him with a small, satisfied tightening of the mouth. The third question caught Daniel between two ways of saying the same thing. He stopped mid-sentence, searched for the right word. The silence that followed was longer than it should have been. Dr. Davis watched the silence, let it sit in the hall, let everyone feel it. Daniel reached the second to last step. The board behind him was almost full now. his clean handwriting covering every available space, thwarting between the earlier failures. The structure he'd built was still standing. He could see the final move. He could see the final move he needed to make. Had seen it from the moment he picked up the chalk. The trouble was that the move didn't look on the board the way it looked in his head. To write it down in a form the room would accept, he needed a piece of formal machinery he'd read about once in a journal 3 years ago. Had never used. Had never needed to use until this exact moment. He started the line, wrote 3 symbols, stopped, looked at what he'd written, knew it was wrong, or at least not yet right, and couldn't in that moment see how to fix it. His hands stayed lifted near the board. A small white smudge of chalk dust had settled across the back of his wrist. Behind him the laughter began to return. Quieter this time. Meaner, because it had been held back so long. It came first from Dr. Harris on the far aisle. She turned to her neighbor with a small relieved smile. Then it spread through the middle rows. 2 and 3 people at a time, the way fire moves through dry grass. Professor Clark crossed his arms again, looked openly satisfied. Dr. Davis stepped closer. She didn't raise her voice, didn't have to. This is why mathematics is not for amateurs. She said it gently enough that only the first 10 rows heard clearly. But the line carried. The people in the back leaned forward, asked the people in front what she'd said, and the words traveled backward through the auditorium in a slow ripple. By the time it reached the last row, where Ryan sat with his coloring book, the laughter had reached it too. Daniel stood with his back to all of it, the chalkboard in front of him almost full, almost all of it his work, and one unfinished line at the bottom that refused to close. His hand was still lifted. The tremor in his fingers was small, but real, and he could see the white dust shake faintly against the dark slate. He thought very clearly that he should have stayed at the back of the room. Thought about the mop bucket still standing in the aisle behind him, abandoned now, slightly tilted on the carpet. Thought about the bills on the kitchen counter, about how late he would already be when he finally got home, about how easy it had been to believe for 40 minutes that the room had been wrong about him. He lowered the chalk, didn't turn around. The laughter behind him went on, soft and certain, the sound of a place returning to the shape it had always meant to hold, the settled sound of a room that had decided how the evening was going to end. Waiting now only for him to confirm it. Daniel didn't turn around, kept his eyes on the unfinished line at the bottom of the board, on the 3 small symbols he'd written there in the wrong order. Stood very still inside the noise. His phone never stopped ringing. Thought for the first time since he'd walked down the aisle about what he was actually trying to do. He'd been answering their questions, citing their theorems in their language, in the order they wanted to hear them in. He'd been climbing a ladder someone else had built against the wrong wall, rung by careful rung. And he'd been doing it because he'd spent his entire adult life being told that this was the only ladder there was. But the proof in his head didn't look like that, had never looked like that. It wasn't a sequence of citations, it was a shape. He'd seen it on the train one winter morning, watching the steel beams of the elevated track fold across each other, above the platform at Garfield Station. And he'd understood. The way a person understands the geometry of a hand they've known their whole life. That, the boundary of the space in the conjecture, behaved the same way those beams did. The whole problem collapsed into something smaller and cleaner the moment you let yourself see it from the side instead of from above. He'd never written it down that way. Had been afraid to. Had spent 40 minutes at this board, trying to translate a shape into a citation. And the translation was killing him. The room behind him wasn't laughing because he was wrong. Was laughing because he'd agreed to fight on terms that didn't belong to him. Daniel thought about the milk crate under his bed. The textbooks with careful handwriting in the margins, understood that he had 2 choices left in the next 60 seconds. Finish the line the way the room wanted it finished, badly, and walk out with what was left of his dignity, or trust the thing he'd carried in his head for 8 years. Let the room see it the way he'd seen it the first time. Daniel raised his free hand, pressed it flat against the board, dragged his palm across the slate, raised the bottom half of his own work, the careful sequence of citations and formal steps he'd built under Dr. Davis's questioning, the line that had stopped him cold a minute earlier. Everything, white chalk dust, drifted down the front of his coveralls, settled along the platform at his feet. The laughter behind him broke off, not all at once. The first few people fell quiet, then the rows behind them, then the back of the auditorium, the way a wind dies through a field of grass. By the time Daniel set down the eraser, the only sound left in the hall was the soft scrape of his own breathing. He picked up the chalk again, started at the cleared space in the middle of the board, didn't write a single citation, drew a figure instead. It wasn't the kind of figure the room expected. Looked at first like two crossed beams of an old industrial frame. The way you might sketch a piece of machinery on the back of a work order. He drew it small and clean, then labeled the corners. A, B, C, D. This is the space in the theorem. His voice was steady now in a way it hadn't been a minute ago. Looked at from the side, he drew a second figure beside it. Identical to the first, but rotated by a quarter turn, and this is the space looked at from above. Pause. The boundary behaves differently in the two views. Every proof attempted in this room tonight has used the second view. He pointed at the rotated figure. The theorem is asking about the first. He tapped the original drawing, then began to fold the problem along the axis the room hadn't seen, worked downward from the figures. The work didn't look like any of the failed attempts above it. Didn't need citations, needed the figures and a small number of clean, almost geometric steps, each one of which any honest person in the auditorium could verify by looking at the picture beside it. He used the older notation again, and this time no one corrected him, because the older notation made the figures fit the page. Dr. Barbara Allen leaned forward in her seat, glasses still pushed up into her hair, mouth slightly open. She didn't seem to know it was open. Professor Clark, 2 rows in front of her, had stopped folding his arms. His hands rested on his knees now, very still. Daniel kept writing. The figures multiplied along the lower half of the board. Each one reduced the problem by a little more. By the third figure, the structure was unmistakable. By the fifth, the path to the end of the proof was visible. The way the end of a tunnel becomes visible long before you reach it. By the sixth, he was no longer proving the original conjecture, was proving something larger, something that contained the original statement as a special case, a generalization. Daniel stopped, looked at what he'd drawn, went back, tacked the original statement of the problem at the top of the board, drew a small bracket around it, and beside the bracket wrote in his careful, even hand a new statement. Benson's boundary conjecture. Generalized form. The generalization was 3 lines long, covered not only the case the symposium had been called to solve, but an entire family of cases that the original statement hadn't even named, the kind of result that written on a different board, in a different room by a different person, would end careers and start others. Daniel set the chalk down on the tray, stepped back from the board. The auditorium was completely silent, the silence of 200 people who had all stopped breathing at approximately the same moment, and had not yet remembered to start again. Then Dr. Barbara Allen stood up. She didn't say anything, just stood. She was a small woman and her standing wasn't dramatic, but in the silence of that hall it carried like a struck bell. A man in the row behind her stood next. Then Dr. Timothy Moore in the second row, who had laughed at Daniel's notation 40 minutes earlier, rose to his feet without taking his eyes off the board. Then Professor Clark, slowly, almost reluctantly, but he stood. Then the row behind him. Then the whole center of the auditorium in a long, uneven wave that traveled outward to the walls. The applause when it came was not the polite applause that ends a lecture, was the other kind, loud and uneven, and it went on for a long time, and several people in the middle rows were applauding with their hands raised above their heads, as if they wanted the man at the board to be certain they meant it. Ryan stood up in the back row, clapped harder than anyone. Fox bright, tears streaming down his cheeks, but smiling, so proud of his father he couldn't contain it. Dr. Patricia Davis had not moved from the edge of the platform. She stood 3 feet from Daniel's arms at her sides. The half-smile she'd worn for most of the evening was gone. What had replaced it was not anger, not embarrassment, but something flatter and more honest than either of those. The expression of a person who had just watched the floor of her own house give way beneath her. She looked at the board, at the generalization, in the small, careful handwriting at the top. Looked finally at Daniel. She didn't speak for a long moment. The applause around her made the silence between them easier to hold. When she finally raised her voice to be heard over the room, it was quieter than anyone in the front rows expected. What you have just shown us is a proof I have not seen in this department, in any journal, or in any conference of my career. Pause. It is original, it is correct, and it is yours. Her voice didn't break, didn't soften either. Was the voice of a woman saying something true because there was nothing else left in the room to say. She didn't apologize, didn't look at the rest of the auditorium, just turned, walked off the platform, walked up the center aisle past the standing rows, out through the doors at the back of the hall. She didn't come back, but as she passed the last row, past where Ryan was standing and clapping, she stopped just for 1 second, looked at the boy, and Daniel couldn't hear what she said, but he saw her lips move, saw Ryan's face change, saw his son nod. Then Dr. Davis was gone. Later Ryan would tell him, would say that the professor had whispered something. Something about his dad being very special. Something about never forgetting that. The applause was fading now. People coming down from the rows, approaching the front. Dr. Allen reached Daniel first, extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm. Who are you? Daniel's throat was dry. Daniel Torres. Where did you study? Iowa State. But I dropped out first year. Dr. Allen stopped, looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. You dropped out? Yes, ma'am. And you taught yourself all of this? Yes, ma'am. Silence. Then Dr. Allen shook her head slowly. You just solved a 37-year-old problem and generalized it in a way I've never seen. Self-taught, she looked back at the board, then at Daniel. That's extraordinary. Dr. Moore was next. You need to publish this. Journal of the American Mathematical Society. I'll write you a recommendation. Daniel blinked. I don't know how to write a mathematics paper. I'll help you. Professor Clark approached. His face had changed completely from earlier. No hostility. No condescension, just respect. If you're interested, Berkeley has positions for visiting researchers. You don't need a degree for that. Not after tonight. Daniel couldn't process the words. Was still trying to understand that this was real, that he wasn't going to wake up on his couch in Dorchester. That this had actually happened. Professor Robert Walker came down from row 5. The colleague who'd questioned Dr. Davis earlier. Who Daniel had seen around the mathematics building late at night. Who'd always nodded at him when they passed in empty hallways. Daniel. Our department would like to offer you a position, visiting research fellow. Salary is $62,000 a year. Full health insurance for you and your son. Daniel's knees went weak. I don't. Dr. Davis resigned 10 minutes ago. Sent an email to the dean from the parking lot. I'm interim chair. The position is yours if you want it. Daniel looked back toward the last row. Ryan was running down the aisle now, ignoring all the important people. Ignoring the professors and the scholars and the graduate students trying to talk to his father. Just running. Hit Daniel at full speed, wrapped his arms around his father's waist. Dad, you were so good. Daniel knelt down, eye level with his son. You were very patient tonight, buddy. Thank you. Are you going to stop cleaning floors? The question was innocent, but it hit Daniel in the chest like a hammer because the answer was yes. Yes, he was going to stop cleaning floors. Yes, everything had just changed. Yes, their life was going to be different now. Yeah, buddy. I think I am. Ryan hugged him again. Tighter this time, and Daniel hugged back, felt 8 years of weight lifting off his shoulders. Thomas Torres had been a steelworker in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 42 years at the same plant. Started when he was 18, worked his way up to supervisor, made decent money. Not great, but enough to own a small house, enough to raise a son, enough to have a life, until the accident, November 2007, machinery malfunction. Something about the hydraulic press. Daniel never got all the details, just got the phone call from his mother. Got on a bus from MIT where he was 3 months into his freshman year. Got home to find his father in a hospital bed with his spine crushed in 3 places. The medical bills started immediately, $520,000. No insurance. The plant had dropped coverage 2 years earlier. Said they couldn't afford it anymore. Said the workers would have to find their own insurance. Most of them didn't. Couldn't afford it. Thought they'd be fine. Thought accidents happened to other people. Thomas Torres died 6 months later, June 2008. The day before Daniels was supposed to go back to MIT for his sophomore year. Daniel didn't go back. He stayed in Cedar Rapids. Worked 3 jobs. Sent every dollar he could to pay down the debt. Got it down to $380,000 over 3 years. Then his mother died. Heart attack. The stress, the bills, the grief. And Daniel was alone, 22 years old with $380,000 in medical debt and no family left. He left Iowa, came to Boston, took the first job he could find. Janitorial work at Westfield University, night shift, midnight to 8 a.m., 6 days a week. Met a woman named Lisa Chen at a coffee shop in Dorchester. She worked checkout at the grocery store down the street. They dated for 6 months, got married at City Hall, had Ryan a year later, and then she left, no explanation, no note, just gone. Daniel came home from his shift one morning and found Ryan crying in his crib. Found the apartment empty of everything that had belonged to Lisa. Found his life reduced to just him and his son, and a one-bedroom apartment in Dorchester. That was 4 years ago. Ryan didn't remember his mother. Sometimes Daniel wondered if that was better. 10 p.m., Daniel and Ryan left through the front entrance. Not the service door, the front where the professors walked, where the students walked, where people who belonged walked. The night was cold. March in Boston, wine coming off the river. Daniel held Ryan's hand, walked down the steps, onto the sidewalk. A campus security guard nodded at them. "Good night, Dr. Torres." Daniel stopped, turned. "I'm not a doctor." The guard smiled. "You will be. Everyone's talking about what you did in there." They kept walking. Daniel looked up at the sky. No stars. Too much light pollution. But he knew they were there. Ryan tugged his hand. "Dad, I'm hungry." Daniel laughed, actually laughed. For the first time in he couldn't remember how long. "Yeah, buddy. Me too. How about pizza?" "Really, really? I got paid tonight, remember? We can afford it. Can we get the big one?" "We can get whatever you want." They walked toward the pizza place on Cambridge Street, the one with the red awning and the tables in the window. The one Daniel had walked past 1,000 times but never gone into because it was too expensive. Tonight he was going in. Tonight they were celebrating. Because for the first time in 19 years, since his father's accident, since the debt, since dropping out of MIT, since all of it, Daniel Torres felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. 1 week later, Daniel showed up for his last shift at the sewing machine repair shop. Mr. Frank Lopez was in the back. 65 years old now, hands permanently stained with machine oil. Had given Daniel this job 7 years ago when no one else would hire him, had paid him cash under the table, had never asked questions, had treated him like family. "Frank, I need to talk to you." Lopez looked up from the singer he was rebuilding. "What's up, kid?" "I'm giving notice. I got another job." Lopez set down his tools, wiped his hands on a rag. "The university?" "Yeah, teaching position." "Research." Lopez smiled. Slow and genuine. "I knew you were too smart for this place. This place saved my life, and you earned every dollar. Don't sell yourself short." Pause. "When do you start?" "Monday." "That's fast." "They want me right away." Lopez walked over, put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son. Your father would be proud too." And that's when Daniel's voice caught. Because he hadn't thought about it that way. Hadn't let himself think about what Thomas Torres would say if he could see this. His son, who dropped out to pay medical bills, who'd spent 19 years cleaning floors and fixing machines, finally getting a chance. Finally using the brain his father had always known was there. "Thank you, Frank. For everything. You stay in touch. You hear me?" "I will." They shook hands, and Daniel walked out of the shop for the last time. 2 weeks later, Professor Walker helped Daniel write his first academic paper. They sat in Daniel's new office, 3rd floor of the mathematics building, room 304, with a window that looked out over the quad, and a nameplate on the door that said Daniel Torres. Visiting research fellow. The paper was 50 pages, tailed proof of the generalized Benson conjecture. Every step explained, every assumption justified, every figure drawn precisely. Walker read it twice, made suggestions, helped with the formatting, with the references, with a language that academic journals expected. Then they submitted it. Journal of the American Mathematical Society, the top journal in pure mathematics, where papers typically took 2 years to get published, if they got published at all. 9 weeks later, Daniel got the email subject line, "Manuscript decision." His hands shook as he opened it. "Dear Mr. Torres, we are pleased to inform you that your manuscript, Generalized Boundary Conditions in Topological Spaces, a complete resolution of Benson's conjecture, has been accepted for publication. The editorial board has recommended expedited publication in our next issue. The reviewer's comments are attached. We note in particular the comment from reviewer 2. This work represents the most significant contribution to the field in nearly 4 decades. Congratulations on this achievement." Daniel read it 3 times, then called Ryan's school, asked them to pull his son out of class. Emergency. When Ryan got to the phone, his voice was worried. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, buddy. I just got some good news." "Really good news? What?" "You know that paper I've been working on? The one about the math problem from the symposium? Yeah, it's going to be published. In a real journal. With my name on it, silence on the other end. Then, does that mean you're famous?" Daniel laughed. "I don't know about famous. But it means people are going to read it. It means what I did matters. I'm proud of you, Dad." And Daniel had to put the phone down for a second, had to cover his mouth with his hand, had to breathe through the tightness in his chest, because his 7-year-old son, who'd watched his father get mocked in front of 200 people, who'd seen his father struggle to pay for medication and field trips and basic necessities, who'd never complained, never asked why their life was harder than other kids' lives, was proud of him. "I'm proud of you too, Ryan. You're the best thing I ever did." 4 months after that night in Pembroke Hall, the article appeared, fall issue, lead position. Author, Daniel Torres. No institutional affiliation listed beneath the name, because Daniel still didn't have a PhD, still didn't have a bachelor's degree, was still technically a college dropout who'd taught himself mathematics from recycled textbooks. The journal editors had asked if he wanted to list Westfield University. Daniel had declined, felt like claiming something he hadn't earned. Professor Walker had laughed when Daniel told him that, "You just solved a problem that stumped the field for 37 years. I think you've earned the right to claim whatever you want." But Daniel was stubborn. The paper went out with just his name, nothing else. And within 2 weeks it had been downloaded over 5,000 times. Daniel still lived in the same apartment, still took the red line to work, still walked the same streets. But everything was different. People recognized him now. Students would stop him in the hallway, ask for help with problem sets, ask for advice, ask if the stories were true. Was it true he used to clean this building? Was it true he taught himself everything? Was it true Dr. Davis resigned the same night? Daniel answered their questions, stayed humble, stayed kind, remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be told you didn't belong, made sure no student in his presence ever felt that way. 6 months after the symposium, Daniel received a letter handwritten, 3 pages, from Dr. Patricia Davis. She'd moved to Vermont, small town called Brattleboro, teaching math at a public middle school, making $48,000 a year. Less than half what she'd made at Westfield. The letter was an apology, real, detailed, unflinching. She explained about her failure in 2016, about trying to prove the Benson conjecture, about the rejection, about the fear that had lived in her chest ever since, about seeing Daniel at the board and feeling that fear turn into rage, into the need to destroy him before he could expose her. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted him to know. Wanted him to understand. Daniel read the letter twice, then sat down and wrote back, 1 page, thanked her for her honesty, told her he accepted her apology, told her something else too, told her that without that night he'd still be cleaning floors, that she'd given him something by forcing him to prove himself, that he was grateful. It was true. He was grateful, not for the humiliation, but for the opportunity that came from it, for the door that opened, for the life that started. 2 weeks later he got another letter from Dr. Davis, shorter this time. Just 4 sentences. "Thank you for your grace. I have framed your letter and hung it in my classroom. When students ask why I teach middle school instead of university, I show it to them. I tell them it teaches me humility." 1 year after that night, Daniel was offered a position at Princeton. Full professor, tenure track, $140,000 a year, plus housing, plus benefits. Dr. Allen called him personally to make the pitch. "Daniel, this is the kind of offer people spend their whole careers working toward. You should take it." Daniel sat in his office, looking out the window at the quad, at the students walking between buildings, at the life he'd built here. "I appreciate it, Dr. Allen. I really do. But I'm going to stay. Why? Because this is where it started. This is where someone finally gave me a chance. I owe this place. You don't owe anyone anything, maybe not. But I want to be here. I want to teach students who might not fit the traditional mold, who might be working 2 jobs, who might have kids, who might think this world isn't for them." Silence on the other end, then Dr. Allen laughed, soft and warm. "You're a good man, Daniel Torres. The field is lucky to have you." 18 months after the symposium, Daniel took on his first PhD student, Jessica Thompson, 19 years old, working class background, $60,000 in student loans. Brilliant mind, but doubting herself, thinking about dropping out. She'd come to Daniel's office one afternoon, knocked on the door. "Professor Torres? Do you have a minute?" "Of course, Jessica. Come in." She sat down, hands twisted in her lap. "I'm thinking about leaving." Daniel set down the paper he'd been reading. "Why? I can't afford it. The loans keep piling up, and I don't know if I belong here. Everyone else seems so confident, so sure, and I just feel like I'm faking it." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Can I tell you something?" "Okay." 8 years ago I was cleaning this building at 2 in the morning. I had a 7th grade education in mathematics. Everything I knew I'd taught myself from books I found in the trash. Jessica looked up. "I didn't belong here either." According to every measure the world uses to decide who gets to do mathematics, I should have been nowhere near this place. But I loved it, and I was stubborn, and I worked harder than anyone else because I had to. Pause. You belong here, Jessica. Not because you have money or connections or perfect confidence. You belong here because you're curious and you work hard and you care about the truth. That's all that matters. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. But the loans? I'm offering you a full PhD fellowship, full tuition, living stipend. You won't pay a cent. I'll make sure of it. Why would you do that? Because someone helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn. 2 years after that night in Pembroke Hall, Daniel Torres was still living in the same apartment in Dorchester. Still taking the Red Line to work every morning. Still eating pizza with Ryan on Friday nights at the place with the red awning. But Ryan was 9 now, doing well in school, no longer needed the inhaler as often, growing up strong and healthy and happy. And Daniel was associate professor, with 6 PhD students, with 2 more papers published, with speaking invitations from universities across the country. With the kind of life he'd stopped letting himself imagine 19 years ago when his father died. One evening in March, exactly 2 years after the symposium, Daniel walked past Pembroke Hall, stopped, looked up at the building, remembered standing at the back with his mop, remembered the laughter, remembered the fear, remembered the moment he decided to trust himself. His phone buzzed oxtext from Ryan. Dad, when are you coming home? I finished my homework. Can we watch a movie? Daniel smiled, tied back, on my way, buddy. You picked the movie. He put his phone away, started walking toward the Red Line, toward home, toward his son, toward the life he'd built, not from privilege, not from connections, not from luck, from stubbornness, from books in trash cans, from nights on the train, from refusing to believe the world when it told him who he was allowed to be. And somewhere in that walk, between the university and the subway station, Daniel understood something. Truth doesn't wait for permission. It finds those who refuse to stop looking. Part 3. 5 years after that night in Pembroke Hall, Daniel Torres sat in his office on a Wednesday afternoon in late summer. The window was open, breeze coming through, campus below mostly empty because classes hadn't started yet. August. That strange quiet week before the semester, when the buildings belonged to the faculty and the graduate students, and no one else. He was reading a dissertation draft, one of Jessica Thompson's chapters. She was in her 4th year now, making excellent progress, would probably defend next spring. His phone buzzed Dame from the dean's subject line. Recognition. Daniel opened it. Daniel, the American Mathematical Society has selected you for their Distinguished Achievement Award. Ceremony in December in San Diego. Congratulations. This is a significant honor. Dean Morrison. Daniel stared at the screen. Write it again. Distinguished Achievement Award. The kind of thing they gave to mathematicians at the end of long careers. Not to 43-year-old former janitors who'd been in academia for 5 years. He forwarded the email to Professor Walker. Got a response in 30 seconds. Fizz is huge. You're buying dinner? Daniel smiled, tub back. I still eat at the same places I always did. You're going to be disappointed. Walker's response. I don't care if we eat at a food truck. We're celebrating. That evening Daniel picked up Ryan from soccer practice. The boy was 12 now. Tall for his age, gangly in that way. Well, 12-year-olds are when their bodies are growing faster than they can keep up with. He threw his bag in the back seat, climbed in front. How was practice? Good. Coach says I might start next game. That's great, buddy. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Ryan asked the question Daniel had been waiting for. Dad, can we talk about high school? What about it? I got the letter. From Boston Latin School, the exam school, the one you had to test into, the one that sent kids to Harvard and MIT and Stanford. Ryan had taken the entrance exam in June. Daniel hadn't pushed him, had just mentioned it once. Said if Ryan was interested, he should try. Ryan had scored in the 97th percentile, got accepted, full scholarship. What do you think? Daniel kept his voice neutral. I don't know. All my friends are going to Dorchester High, but I kind of want to go to Latin. Is that bad? Daniel pulled into their apartment complex, parked, turned to face his son, Ryan. You should go wherever you want, not where your friends are going, not where you think you're supposed to go, where you want to go. What if I don't fit in? Then you'll figure it out. Like we always do. Ryan looked out the window at their building, 3rd floor, same apartment they'd lived in for 12 years. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt, thought about how far they'd come. They got out of the car, walked up the 3 flights, the same stairs Daniel had climbed 10,000 times. Mrs. Sanchez was standing in her doorway, 73 now, moving slower than she used to, but still sharp, still kind. Hello, Daniel. Hello, Ryan. Hi, Mrs. Sanchez. Ryan, I heard you got into Latin. Congratulations. Thank you, your father must be very proud. She looked at Daniel when she said it, and Daniel knew what she was really saying. Was remembering that night 5 years ago when she'd fallen. When Daniel had brought Ryan to the symposium. When everything changed. Very proud. Daniel's voice was thick. They went inside. Daniel made dinner spaghetti, Ryan's favorite, sisable. The kind of meal that required no thought, no planning, just muscle memory at this point. While the water boiled, Ryan sat at the table doing homework, pre-algebra, finding it easy, which made Daniel both proud and worried. Proud because his son was smart. Worried because smart kids get bored, and bored kids make mistakes. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever think about Mom? Daniel's hand froze on the wooden spoon. Lisa, Ryan's mother, who'd left when Ryan was 3, who hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't sent child support, hadn't acknowledged her son's existence in 9 years. Sometimes, do you think she ever thinks about us? Daniel turned around, leaned against the counter. I don't know, buddy. I hope so. Would you want to see her again? That's complicated. Why? Because Daniel had spent 9 years being both parents. Had spent 9 years making sure Ryan never felt the absence. Had spent 9 years terrified that Lisa would show up and want back in. Want to disrupt the life they'd built. Want to be a mother after 9 years of being a ghost, because people change. And sometimes when they come back, they're not who you remember. Ryan nodded, went back to his homework, didn't push, and Daniel was grateful, turned back to the stove, stirred the sauce, tried not to think about the email in his inbox from 3 weeks ago, the one he hadn't told Ryan about, the one with Lisa's name in the subject line, the one he'd been too afraid to open. September classes started. Daniel was teaching 2 courses this semester, Introduction to Topology for undergraduates, and a graduate seminar on boundary value problems. 45 students in the topology class, most of them juniors and seniors. A few brave sophomores. First day Daniel walked in without notes, without slides, just chalk, stood at the front of the lecture hall. I'm Daniel Torres. This is topology. If you're in the wrong room, now's the time to leave. No one moved. Good. Let me tell you what this class is about. It's about seeing space differently, about understanding that the things we think are fixed and rigid are actually fluid, flexible. That distance doesn't always mean what we think it means. He walked to the board, drew a circle. This is a circle. Everyone agrees on that. Drew another shape next to it, square. This is a square. Also agreement. Then he drew a third shape, something that looked like a deformed circle, wavy. Irregular. Is this a circle? A student in the front row raised her hand. No? Wrong. In topology, this is exactly the same as a circle, because I can deform one into the other without cutting or gluing. The circle and this blob are topologically equivalent. He could see the confusion on their faces. Good. Confusion meant they were thinking, this class is going to challenge everything you think you know about shapes and space and distance. It's going to be hard. It's going to be frustrating. You're going to want to quit at least 3 times. But if you stick with it, you'll see the world differently. And that's worth the struggle. A student in the back raised his hand. Professor Torres, is it true you used to clean this building? Daniel set down the chalk. Had been expecting this question. Got it every semester, yes. I worked janitorial at Westfield for 8 years. Midnight to 8 a.m. And you taught yourself math? Yes, why? Because I loved it. And because I had time. And because the textbooks were free if you knew where to look. Another student, girl in the 3rd row with unusual hair. Did people make fun of you? Yes. How did you deal with it? Daniel thought about that night, about Dr. Davis, about the laughter, about wanting to disappear. I decided their opinion of me mattered less than my opinion of myself. That's not easy. I'm not pretending it's easy. But it's necessary. The girl nodded, wrote something in her notebook. Daniel went back to the board, started the actual lecture. But he could feel the shift in the room, the way they were looking at him, not as some distant authority figure, but as someone who'd been where they might be, who'd struggled, who'd made it through. It changed things, made them willing to take risks, to ask questions, to admit when they didn't understand, which was exactly what he wanted. October, Daniel received a letter, physical mail, handwritten address. No return address. He opened it standing in the mathematics building mailroom. Dear Daniel, you don't know me, but I know you. My name is Robert Chen. I'm a high school math teacher in Sacramento. I read about you 3 years ago in a newspaper article. About the janitor who solved the impossible problem, I printed that article and hung it in my classroom. When students tell me they're not good at math, I show them your story. When they say they'll never go to college because their parents can't afford it, I tell them about you. Last week, one of my students, Maria Rodriguez, got accepted to UC Berkeley with a full scholarship. She's the first person in her family to go to college. When she told me, she said it was because she saw your article and thought maybe she could do it too. I wanted you to know that. Wanted you to know your story matters beyond the mathematics, beyond the proofs and the journals and the awards. You're showing kids who look like you or come from where you come from that there's a path. That's worth more than any theorem. Thank you. Robert Chendaniel read the letter 3 times, folded it carefully, put it in his bag, walked to his office with his vision blurry, closed the door, sat at his desk, put his head in his hands and cried. Not from sadness, from the weight of understanding that his life meant something beyond himself. That the night he'd walked to that board, the night he'd been terrified and humiliated and certain he was making a mistake, that night had rippled out, had touched people he'd never meet, kids in Sacramento, kids in Baltimore, kids in Houston and Phoenix and Cleveland. Kids who needed to know that the world's assessment of them wasn't final, wasn't binding, wasn't truth. November, Ryan came home from school with a split lip. Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner, heard the door open, heard Ryan's footsteps, heavier than usual, slower, turned around, saw his son's face. What happened? Nothing, Ryan. The boy's shoulders sagged. Some kids at school. They were saying stuff. Daniel's jaw tightened. What kind of stuff? About you. About how you used to be a janitor. About how we're poor. Are we poor? Ryan looked around the apartment, at the secondhand furniture, at the kitchen with mismatched plates, at the TV from 2015 that still worked fine. Compared to them we are. Daniel pulled out a chair, sat down, gestured for Ryan to sit too. Did you hit them? One of them. Why? He said you only got your job because the university felt sorry for you. Said you didn't earn it. Daniel took a breath. Let it out slowly, Ryan. Listen to me. People are going to say things. Especially when you come from where we come from. When you don't fit their idea of what success looks like. But it's not fair. No, it's not. But fighting them doesn't change their minds. You know what changes their minds? What? Living well. Being better than they think you can be. Not because you're trying to prove them wrong. But because you know who you are and they don't get to define that. Ryan wiped his face with his sleeve. I'm sorry I hit him. Are you suspended? 3 days? Then you've got 3 days to think about whether that was worth it. And 3 days to get ahead on homework so you don't fall behind. You're not mad? I'm not mad you defended me. I'm disappointed you let them get to you. There's a difference. Ryan nodded, stood up, walked to his room. Daniel sat at the table for a long time after, thinking about the cost of their story, the way it inspired some people, made others resentful, the way Ryan had to carry it whether he wanted to or not. December, San Diego, the American Mathematical Society Awards ceremony. Daniel flew out on Friday, took Ryan with him. First time either of them had been to California. The hotel was downtown, walking distance to the convention center, nicer than anywhere they'd ever stayed. Ryan kept touching things, the marble counters, the thick towels, the mints on the pillows. Dad, this place is fancy. Yeah, buddy. It is? Do you feel weird here? Daniel did feel weird. Felt like he was wearing someone else's clothes, playing someone else's part. But he also felt like maybe he'd earned the right to be here, a little. But that's okay. Weird isn't bad. Saturday evening, the ceremony. Black tie. Daniel owned exactly one suit. Had bought it 3 years ago for academic conferences. Navy. Off the rack from Macy's. Fit well enough. Ryan wore khakis and a button down. Looked like a little adult. Which made Daniel's chest tight, because when did his son get so grown up? The ballroom was enormous. Hundreds of mathematicians. People Daniel had only read about, Fields medalists, National Academy members, people whose work he'd studied, whose papers he'd memorized. Professor Walker was there, saved them seats at his table. Dr. Barbara Allen was there too, wearing an elegant dress, hair pinned up. She hugged Daniel when she saw him. You clean up nice, thanks. You too, who's this handsome young man? Ryan shook her hand, formal, polite. Ryan Torres. Nice to meet you, ma'am. Ma'am. I like this kid. Dr. Allen winked at Daniel. They sat. Dinner was served, chicken or fish. Ryan chose chicken, ate about half. Spent the rest of the time looking around, taking it all in. After dessert, the awards started. Several categories. Lifetime achievement, outstanding teaching, best dissertation. Finally, they got to distinguished achievement. The presenter was someone Daniel recognized from papers. Professor Margaret Foster MIT. one of the most respected topologists alive. She stood at the podium. Our final award tonight recognizes an individual whose contributions have fundamentally advanced our understanding of topological spaces. This year's recipient took an unconventional path to mathematics, taught himself from discarded textbooks, worked as a janitor while developing insights that eluded specialists for decades. The room had gone quiet. Everyone knew who she was talking about. 5 years ago, he walked to a chalkboard in front of 200 skeptics and changed everything, not just the mathematics, but our understanding of who gets to do mathematics, of where insight comes from, of what we lose when we gatekeep knowledge. She paused, looked directly at Daniel. The American Mathematical Society Distinguished Achievement Award goes to Dr. Daniel Torres for his resolution and generalization of Benson's boundary conjecture, and for reminding us that genius doesn't require permission. It requires courage. The room stood, applauded. Ryan grabbed his father's hand, squeezed tight. Daniel walked to the stage, shook Professor Foster's hand, accepted the plaque, stood at the podium. 200 faces looking up at him. Different faces than that night, different expressions. But the same feeling in his chest. The same fear that he'd open his mouth and nothing would come out. He gripped the podium. Thank you. I'm not good at speeches, so I'll keep this short. Scattered laughter. 5 years ago, I wasn't supposed to be here. According to every measure our field uses to determine who belongs, I should have been nowhere near a research institution. No degree, no publications, no mentors. Just a mop and a curiosity I couldn't kill. Pause. Someone in this room told me that night that mathematics wasn't for amateurs. She was right. Mathematics isn't for amateurs. But it's also not just for professionals. It's for anyone willing to look at a problem and refuse to accept that it's unsolvable. For anyone stubborn enough to keep working when everyone else says stop. He looked at Ryan in the audience. His son was crying, trying to hide it. Not succeeding. I'm accepting this award not just for me, but for every kid who's been told they're not smart enough, not prepared enough, not the right kind of person to do this work. You are. You absolutely are. If you love it, if you're willing to work, if you refuse to let anyone else define your limits. He held up the plaque. This belongs to all of us. The room stood again. Longer applause this time. Daniel walked off stage, went directly to Ryan. His son stood, hugged him, hard. I'm so proud of you, Dad. Daniel couldn't speak, just held his son, let the room keep clapping. Let himself feel for one moment the enormity of how far they'd come. January, back in Boston, spring semester starting. Daniel was in his office when Professor Walker knocked. Got a minute? Always. Walker came in, closed the door, sat down. I need to tell you something. And I need you to not react immediately. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Okay. Dr. Davis reached out to me. She wants to meet with you. Silence. Patricia Davis? Yeah, why? She didn't say. Just asked if I thought you'd be willing. I told her I'd ask. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Hadn't thought about Patricia Davis in over a year. Knew she was still in Vermont, still teaching middle school. They'd exchanged a few letters early on. But that had faded. Where does she want to meet? Here. Next week. If you're willing. Did she say what it's about? No, but Daniel. She sounded different. I can't explain it, but different. Daniel thought about it. About whether he wanted to revisit that chapter, about whether there was any point. Tell her yes. The following Tuesday, Daniel arrived at the cafe on Cambridge Street, the one with the red awning, the place he and Ryan went for pizza. Patricia Davis was already there. Sitting at a corner table, she looked different, older. Softer somehow. Hair completely silver now. No makeup. Casual clothes instead of the professional attire he remembered. She stood when she saw him, extended her hand. Daniel shook it. They sat, ordered coffee, waited in awkward silence until it arrived. Finally, Patricia spoke. Thank you for meeting me, of course. I know this is strange. I debated whether to reach out. But I want to tell you something in person. Daniel waited. My daughter Amanda just finished her first semester at MIT. She's studying mathematics. That's wonderful. She's struggling. Not with the work, she's brilliant. But with imposter syndrome. With feeling like she doesn't belong. With the voice in her head that says she's not good enough. Patricia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Last week she called me crying. Said she wanted to drop out. Said everyone else seemed so confident and she felt like a fraud. And I told her about you. Daniel blinked. About me? About that night. About how you walked to that board. About how you proved everyone wrong, including me. About how the most important thing you did wasn't solving the problem. It was believing you could when no one else did. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. She asked me what happened to you, if you finished school, if you became a professor. I told her yes. Told her you just won the Distinguished Achievement Award. Told her you're one of the most respected mathematicians in the country. Pause. She asked if she could meet you. Daniel didn't know what to say. I would never ask you to do this. I have no right. But I'm asking anyway. Would you be willing to talk to her? Not as a professor, just as someone who's been where she is. Daniel thought about Ryan, about the letter from the teacher in Sacramento, about Robert Chen's student Maria who got into Berkeley, about the ripples, of course. Tell her to email me. We'll set something up. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Patricia. Can I ask you something? Anything. Are you happy? In Vermont. Teaching middle school, she considered the question. Really considered it. I wasn't at first. I was angry, bitter, felt like I'd been exiled. But over time, yes, I'm happy. I'm teaching kids who might not go to college, who might not ever take another math class, and I'm showing them that math isn't about memorizing formulas. It's about thinking, about problem solving, about not giving up. She smiled. Small and real, I'm doing work that matters. It took me 30 years and a very public failure to figure that out. But I got there. They talked for another hour, about their lives, about teaching, about the ways the field was changing, about the ways it still needed to change. When they stood to leave, Patricia hugged him, quick. Awkward, but real. I'm proud of what you've built, Daniel. And I'm sorry it took me so long to say that. We all get there at our own pace. February, Amanda Davis came to Daniel's office. She looked like her mother. Same sharp features, same intensity. But with an uncertainty Patricia had never shown. She sat across from his desk, hands folded in her lap. Thank you for meeting with me, Professor Torres. Call me Daniel. And it's my pleasure. My mom said you wanted to talk. She said you were thinking about leaving. Amanda nodded, looked down. Everyone else seems so confident. Like they know they belong, and I feel like I'm faking it. Like someone's going to figure out I'm not actually smart enough to be here. Daniel leaned forward. Can I tell you something? Every single person who seems confident is also faking it. Some of them are just better at hiding it than you are. Really? Really. I've been at this for 5 years, and I still wake up some mornings thinking someone's going to figure out I don't belong. That they're going to realize I'm just a guy who read some books and got lucky. But you won an award. Doesn't matter. The voice doesn't care about awards. It just wants you to give up. Amanda looked up, met his eyes for the first time. How do you ignore it? I don't. I just don't let it make my decisions. The voice can talk all it wants, but I'm the one who decides what I do next. He stood, walked to his bookshelf, pulled out a worn copy of a topology textbook. This is the first math book I ever owned. Found it in a recycling bin in 2014. It's falling apart. The binding's shot. There are coffee stains on half the pages. He handed it to her. But I learned topology from this book. On the train. During lunch breaks. At 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. And every time I thought I was too dumb to understand it, I just kept reading, kept working problems, kept showing up. Amanda flipped through the pages, saw the notes in the margins, the careful handwriting. This is amazing. You know what's amazing? You're at MIT, with a full scholarship, at 19 years old, taking classes from some of the best mathematicians in the world. That's amazing. The fact that you sometimes doubt yourself, that's normal. Don't confuse normal with failure. Amanda closed the book, handed it back. Can I ask you something? Sure. That night when everyone was laughing at you. How did you keep going? Daniel thought about it, about the real answer. I looked at my son. He was 7 years old, sitting in the back row, watching his father get humiliated. And I realized if I backed down, he'd learn that the world gets to decide who we are. That other people's opinions matter more than our own truth. I couldn't teach him that. So I kept going. That's really brave. No, it was terrifying. Bravery is just doing the thing even when you're terrified. They talked for another 40 minutes. About classes, about research, about how to deal with the pressure, about how to ask for help without feeling weak. When Amanda left, she looked different. Shoulders back, head up. Like maybe she'd remembered something about herself she'd forgotten. Daniel watched her walk down the hallway, thought about how many Amanda Davises were out there. How many kids who just needed someone to tell them they belonged. How that was maybe more important than any theorem he'd ever prove. Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m. Daniel's phone rang. Mrs. Helen Sanchez, the neighbor across the hall who watched Ryan when Daniel had to work nights. 68 years old, retired school teacher, kind eyes, soft voice. Charged $15 a night, which was way below market rate, but she said she liked Ryan. Said he reminded her of her own grandson who lived in California and never visited Daniel. I'm so sorry, those words. Those 4 words. Daniel knew exactly what was coming next. I fell this morning, nothing serious. But I'm at Mass General right now. They want to keep me overnight for observation. Daniel closed his eyes. I can't watch Ryan tonight. I understand. I'm really sorry. It's okay, Mrs. Sanchez. Don't worry about it. I hope you're okay, I'll be fine. Just old bones. You know how it is. Daniel hung up, looked at the clock. 5 hours until his shift started, the special shift. The one he'd picked up 2 weeks ago when Dr. Davis's assistant had sent out an email to the janitorial department. Saturday night symposium. High-profile event. Lots of important people. Need extra cleaning staff on hand. Pays double. Time and a half. $150 for 6 hours. Daniel had jumped at it. $150 meant Ryan's medication covered. Meant electric bill paid. Meant breathing room. But now Mrs. Sanchez couldn't watch Ryan. And Daniel didn't have anyone else. He scrolled through his phone. Looked at the list of contacts. It was short Mr. Frank Lopez, his boss at the sewing machine shop. Daniel called. Straight to voicemail, Carlos Martinez. Guy he sometimes talked to at the university. Worked maintenance. Daniel called. No answer, Jennifer Wu, woman at Ryan's school. Another parent. They'd talked a few times at pickup. Seemed nice. Daniel called. She picked up. Hello? Hi, Jennifer. It's Daniel. Ryan's dad. Oh, hi. What's up? I know this is really last minute, but I'm in a bind. I have to work tonight and my usual babysitter can't make it. Would you be able to watch Ryan for a few hours? Silence then. Oh, Daniel, I'm so sorry. We're in New York this weekend. Visiting my sister. Right. Of course. No problem. I wish I could help. It's fine. Really. Have a good time. He hung up, looked at Ryan sitting on the couch, watching cartoons. Completely unaware that his father was about to make a terrible decision, Daniel walked over. Sat down next to his son. Hey, buddy. How would you like to come to work with Dad tonight? Ryan looked up. Eyes wide. Really? Really? But you have to promise me something. What? You have to sit very still and very quiet. Dad's going to be working in a big room with lots of people. You can bring your coloring book. But you can't run around. You can't make noise. Can you do that? Ryan nodded so hard his whole body moved. I can do that, Dad. I promise. Daniel pulled his son close, hugged him tight, felt the weight of every single decision he'd made in the last 7 years, pressing down on his shoulders. This was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake, but he didn't have a choice. He needed that $150. March, 5 years and 1 month after that night in Pembroke Hall, Daniel stood at the back of the same auditorium. Different event, graduate student symposium. One of his students was presenting, Jessica Thompson, defending her dissertation proposal. Daniel watched from the last row, same spot where he'd stood with his mop, where he'd heard Dr. Davis ask if anyone really thought the janitor understood advanced mathematics. Where everything started, Jessica was nervous. He could see it in the way she gripped the podium, in the slight shake of her hands. But her work was solid, her presentation clear. The faculty asked tough questions. She answered them, not perfectly, but well enough. When she finished, the committee deliberated. Came back 5 minutes later. Approved. Jessica's face lit up. She looked directly at Daniel in the back row, mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Daniel nodded. Felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the privilege of being someone's Professor Walker. Someone's second chance. After the presentation, Jessica found him in the hallway. I did it. You did it. I was so nervous, I know. You handled it well, because you taught me how. You showed me it's okay to not know everything. To admit when you're uncertain. To keep working anyway. She hugged him. Quick and impulsive, then pulled back embarrassed. Sorry. That was unprofessional. Daniel laughed. Jessica. 5 years ago I was cleaning this building. Professional is relative. I'm proud of you. That's what matters. They walked together toward the exit, past Pembroke Hall. Jessica stopped. Is it weird for you? Being back here? Sometimes. But also not. This place took me seriously when no one else would. I'll always be grateful for that. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone to the board that night? Daniel had thought about it. Many times. I'd probably still be cleaning floors. Ryan might not have gone to Boston Latin. Jessica Thompson might have dropped out. Amanda Davis might have left MIT. Robert Chen's student in Sacramento might not have applied to Berkeley. He paused, but those are all maybes. The only thing I know for sure is I'm glad I took the risk. Even when it was terrifying. Especially then, they reached the exit, stepped out into March sunshine. Campus was busy now, students everywhere, spring semester in full swing. Daniel looked back at the building, at Pembroke Hall, at the place that changed everything. That evening, Daniel went home, climbed the same 3 flights, opened the door to find Ryan doing homework at the kitchen table, 12 years old, growing up so fast. making his own decisions about high school and friends and who he wanted to be. "Hey buddy, how was your day?" "Good. Got an A on my algebra test. Nice work." Daniel made dinner, they ate together. Talked about Ryan's soccer game coming up. About whether he'd start. About the girl in his English class who might like him. About normal things. The kind of normal Daniel had spent years fighting for. After dinner, Ryan went to his room to finish homework. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, pulled up the email he'd been avoiding for 3 months. The one from Lisa, his ex-wife. Ryan's mother. He'd read it once, back in August, had closed it immediately, hadn't looked at it since. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't quite name, he opened it again. "Daniel, I know I have no right to contact you. I know I gave up that right 9 years ago when I walked out. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking to see Ryan. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I was young and scared and overwhelmed, and I made the worst decision of my life. I've spent 9 years regretting it, wondering about him, about you, about what kind of people you became. I saw an article about you last year, about the math award, about your story. I'm so proud of you. I always knew you were brilliant. I'm glad the world finally sees it too. Tell Ryan I think about him every day. Tell him I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to be his mother. Tell him he deserves better than I could give him. I won't contact you again. I just needed you to know." Lisa. Daniel read it twice, closed the laptop, sat in silence for a long time, thinking about whether to tell Ryan, whether it would help or hurt, whether some doors were better left or closed. He didn't know, would have to sit with it. Talk to Ryan when the time was right, but not tonight. Tonight was just for sitting in their apartment, with their mismatched plates and second-hand furniture, with the life they'd built. The one that started with nothing and became something. Not because of luck, not because of privilege, but because they kept showing up, kept working, kept believing when everyone else said stop. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Saturday evening, 6 p.m., Daniel and Ryan took the red line from Savin Hill to Park Street, switched to the green line, got off at Westfield Station, walked 3 blocks to campus. Ryan held his father's hand the whole way, asked questions about everything, about the train, about the people, about where they were going, what Dad would be doing, what the room looked like. If there would be food, Daniel answered every question. Kept his voice calm, kept his face neutral, tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. They arrived at Pembroke Hall at 6:30. Daniel used his key card to open the service entrance, led Ryan down the back hallway, past the storage closets, past the electrical room, past the old elevator that barely worked, up to the main floor. The hallway outside Pembroke Hall was already crowded, people in suits, people in dresses, people carrying leather folders and expensive bags, professors, graduate students, visiting scholars from other universities. Daniel kept Ryan close, walked along the wall, tried to be invisible. They slipped into the auditorium through the back door. The room was massive, 400 seats, tiered seating like a movie theater, huge chalkboard across the entire front wall, professional lighting, sound system, everything, and it was filling up fast. Daniel found a seat in the very last row, far corner, away from everyone else. "Okay, buddy, you sit right here. Don't move, don't go anywhere. I'm going to be working down there." Daniel pointed to the front of the room. "If you need me, you can wave. But only if it's an emergency, okay?" Ryan nodded, pulled out his coloring book, the robot page. "Still half blue, half red. I'll be good, Dad." Daniel believed him. Ryan was always good even when life wasn't. The symposium started at 7 p.m. sharp. Dr. Patricia Davis took the stage. She was 52 years old, chair of the mathematics department, nationally recognized expert in topological algebra, published over 40 papers, sat on the editorial boards of 3 major journals, made $140,000 a year, plus benefits plus speaking fees, and she was brilliant. Daniel had read her work late at night, after his shift, when the buildings were empty and quiet, when he could sit in the library with a stack of journals and actually concentrate, actually think. He'd been doing that for 8 years, reading mathematics journals, studying theorems, teaching himself what he'd lost when he left MIT 19 years ago. Dr. Davis stood behind the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the audience. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight." Her voice was clear, strong. The voice of someone who'd spent 30 years lecturing to rooms full of students. "Tonight we're going to attempt something ambitious. We're going to work together, as a community, to solve one of the most challenging problems in our field." She gestured to the board behind her. The projection screen lowered. A title appeared. Benson's boundary conjecture below it, a mathematical statement, complex notation. Greek letters, subscripts, integrals, limits. Daniel knew it by heart. He'd been thinking about this problem for 8 years, ever since he found that journal in the recycling bin behind the faculty lounge. May 2015, Journal of Topology, page 73, the conjecture proposed by Professor Theodore Benson of MIT in 1989. 37 years and solved, Dr. Davis continued, this conjecture deals with the behavior of topological spaces at their boundaries. For 37 years mathematicians have tried to prove it. Many have come close. None have succeeded. She paused. Tonight we're going to succeed. Applause. Daniel stood at the back, next to his cleaning cart, mop in hand, bottles of cleaning solution on the lower shelf. Exactly where Dr. Davis had pointed 45 minutes from now, when she would tell 200 people that he couldn't even count them correctly. But that hadn't happened yet. Right now Daniel was just watching, just listening, just waiting for them to start. Dr. Timothy Moore from Stanford went first. He was 43 years old, tall, thin, wire-frame glasses, spoke with the confidence of someone who'd been solving hard problems his whole life. He walked to the board, picked up chalk, discarded writing. His approach was substitution-based, taking the complex boundary conditions and replacing them with simpler expressions, building a chain of equalities, trying to work his way to a contradiction that would prove the conjecture. He worked for 30 minutes, filled half the board. The audience watched in silence. Daniel watched too, saw the mistake at minute 12, a sign error in line 7. Small, easy to miss, but fatal. He wanted to say something, wanted to raise his hand, or call out, or walk down and point at the board, but he didn't, because he was the janitor. And janitors didn't correct Stanford professors. At minute 32, a graduate student named Laura Ramirez raised her hand. Dr. Moore. Line 7. I think there's a sign error. Moore stopped, looked back at what he'd written, stared at it for a long moment, then his shoulders dropped. You're right. Thank you, Laura. He put the chalk down, walked back to his seat, didn't look at anyone. Dr. Davis stood up. Thank you, Dr. Moore. A valiant attempt. Next, Professor Kenneth Clark from Berkeley went next. 50 years old, beard trimmed, rumpled sport coat. The kind of professor who looked like he'd been solving equations since birth. His approach was topological. Instead of substitution, he tried to map the boundary space onto a known structure. Something already proven. Something that would give them the result they needed. He worked for 40 minutes, got further than Moore, filled 3/4 of the board. But at minute 38, Dr. Davis herself stood up. Kenneth, I'm going to stop you there. Clark turned around. This approach won't work. The mapping you're suggesting requires conditions that don't hold in this space. Clark looked at the board, looked at Davis, looked back at the board. Are you certain? Yes. Silence. Clark put the chalk down, walked back to his seat, sat down hard. Dr. Davis smiled. Not a kind smile, the smile of someone who'd just proven she was the smartest person in the room. 8:15 p.m., break time. 15 minutes, the audience filed out to the hallway, grabbed coffee, talked in small groups, debated approaches, argued about notation. Daniel stayed inside, walked up to the board, looked at the work. Moore's attempt on the left, crossed out with a thick line. Clark's attempt on the right, also crossed out, the original conjecture still written at the top. Daniel stared at it. The problem wasn't with their math. Their math was fine. The problem was their assumption. They all assumed the boundary behaved like the interior, continuous, smooth, predictable. But it didn't. Daniel had figured that out 6 years ago, winter morning. January 2019, riding the red line to work, looking out the window at Garfield Station, watching the steel beams of the elevated track crisscross above the platform, seeing the way they bent, folded, created angles, and suddenly understanding the boundary wasn't continuous. It was folded, multi-layered. You had to look at it from the side, not from above. Everything changed when you looked at it from the side. Daniel stood there for a long moment, wanted to write it down, wanted to show them, but he didn't, because he was still just the janitor. And this wasn't his place. Ryan waved from the back row. Daniel waved back, walked over to check on his son. You doing okay, buddy? Yeah. I finished the robot. Daniel looked at the coloring book. The robot was complete, blue chest, red arms, green eyes. It looks great. Thanks, Dad. You hungry? A little. I'll get you something when we're done. Okay? Okay. Daniel heard people coming back from break. He returned to his position at the back of the room, picked up his mop, tried to look busy, tried to be invisible. 8:30 p.m. Dr. Davis took the stage herself. I'd like to try something. She walked to the board, raised everything except the original conjecture, started writing. Her approach was different from both Moore and Clark. She used functional analysis, breaking the boundary into small pieces, analyzing each piece separately, trying to prove the conjecture held locally, then extending to the global case. It was elegant, sophisticated, exactly the kind of proof you'd expect from someone with 30 years of experience. And it was wrong. Daniel saw it immediately. Same mistake as the others. She was assuming the boundary was continuous, treating it like a smooth curve instead of a folded surface. She worked for 45 minutes. The room was completely silent, everyone watching, everyone holding their breath. At minute 40, she reached her conclusion, wrote the final line, stepped back, looked at what she'd written, frowned. The math was correct, the logic was sound. But the result didn't match the conjecture. She'd proven something, just not the thing they needed. Dr. Davis stood there for a long moment, staring at the board, staring at her own work. Then Professor Robert Walker spoke up from row 5. Patricia, the boundary condition in line 12. Are you certain that's correct? Davis turned around. What do you mean? You're assuming continuity. But does that assumption hold? Silence. Davis looked back at the board. It's a standard assumption, but is it correct? More silence. Davis didn't answer because she wasn't sure, and everyone in the room could see it. 8:45 p.m. Daniel was still standing at the back, still holding his mop, still watching, still knowing exactly what the problem was, still saying nothing. Ryan had started to get restless, shifting in his seat. Looking around, Daniel caught his eye, mouthed the words, "Just a little longer." Ryan nodded, went back to his coloring book, started a new page, a dragon this time from Stephen Hill, the graduate student. Turned around in his seat and said something to the person next to him, loud enough for the people around him to hear. Maybe we should reconsider the boundary assumption. Dr. Davis heard him. The boundary assumption is standard. It's been used in dozens of papers, but what if it's wrong? Davis's face hardened. It's not wrong. It's foundational to the entire field. Stephen didn't back down, but we've been working on this for 3 hours. 3 different approaches, all failures. Maybe the foundation is the problem. Murmurs from the audience, people starting to agree, starting to question. Dr. Davis didn't like it, didn't like losing control of the room. She opened her mouth to respond, and that's when Daniel said it. Didn't mean to, didn't plan it, just said it. Quiet, under his breath. Barely audible. The assumption is wrong. 2 people in front of him heard it, turned around, looked at him. One of them laughed. What did you say? Daniel didn't repeat it, just stood there, but the damage was done. The laugh had carried. More people turned around. More people looking at the janitor with the mop. Stephen Hill stood up, turned around completely, looked straight at Daniel. Did you just say the assumption is wrong? Daniel didn't answer. Stephen smiled, not a friendly smile. Someone back here thinks they know better than Dr. Davis. And that's when the room exploded. People laughed, people turned, people stared. Dr. Davis walked down from the stage, came up the center aisle, stopped 2 rows from Daniel. Her face was calm, but her eyes were cold. It seems we have a contribution from the back of the room. A few people chuckled. Davis let them. Then she gestured to Daniel's cleaning cart, to the mop, to the bottles of solution lined up on the lower shelf. Him, long pause. Let everyone look, let everyone see. The janitor with wet gloves and dirty coveralls. He can't even count the cleaning bottles in his cart correctly. Laughter. Real laughter now. Not polite academic chuckling. Real honest laughter at someone else's expense. And you people think he understands advanced theorem structures? More laughter, louder. Some people clapping, some people shaking their heads. Daniel stood completely still, felt himself shrinking, felt the room pressing in, felt every single person's eyes on him, looked up at Ryan. His son had stopped coloring, was watching his father, eyes wide, scared, about to cry, and Daniel thought about backing down, thought about apologizing, thought about saying, "I'm sorry, Dr. Davis, I was mistaken." Thought about picking up his mop, going back to work, letting this moment pass, letting everyone forget. But then he looked at Ryan again, really looked at him, and remembered something. 2 weeks ago, Ryan had asked, "Dad, why don't you work during the day like other dads?" And Daniel had said, "I work the jobs I can get, buddy." And Ryan had said, "But you're smart. My teacher says you're really smart. She said you help me with math better than anyone." And Daniel had said, "Being smart and having opportunities are different things." And Ryan had asked, "What's opportunities?" And Daniel had said, "It's when people give you a chance." And Ryan had said, "Did people give you a chance, Dad?" And Daniel hadn't answered, because the answer was no. People hadn't given him a chance, not after he left MIT, not after his father died, not after the debt, not after any of it. But right now, in this moment, in this room, with 200 people watching, with his son watching, Daniel could give himself a chance.